You know, it's an honor to get to be here, and you guys hear me fine, good, and with us here, and we're also streaming live with a lot of different parents and communities across the country, and you know, when I began really speaking and kind of Your Life Speaks, our organization was born. It was literally really kind of factored in this reality that your life, it speaks, it screams, it shouts, like your actions and your decision making. And, you know, over the last several years, as I began to realize that so many of our stories, so many of our lives are so similar when it comes to just the story. I always tell students and people, your story, my story, it's the story. It's the story of people trying to figure out who we are and what we want to achieve and the things that we have to become, as well as we have to navigate the emotions and feelings and the pressure from external. Our lives are meant, I believe, to have full of purpose and hope and for us to experience. The challenge is, though, is too often our feelings and our emotions and just the pressures of life can really get to us. And what I've noticed, and I'm going to take this off, and hopefully it stops rubbing against that microphone. It always works perfect, right, when you're doing sound checks and then you get started and there's always a sound issue. But what I've learned, and what the message that I've really carried this morning, and we're going to dig into a lot of these topics, is that pressure and uncomfortability and challenges throughout our entire life, from a young person all the way up to when we get old and we get seasoned, there will always be challenges and adversity and difficulties. But the truth is, you're never a product of anything around you. You're always a product of what you do in the middle of the storm. That decisions determine destiny, and that choices we make controls future outcomes. Not circumstances and not situations. And so for me, with Your Life Speaks, it's always been based trying to get people to face sometimes the things that we're the most afraid of, which is ourselves, which is getting comfortable, being uncomfortable, sometimes navigating emotions and feelings that aren't always the best. And over the last 20 months, there's never been a more important time for us as people, young and old, to realize that feelings and emotions can lie to us. Just because we feel alone, it doesn't mean we're really alone. Just because we feel like nobody cares, it doesn't really mean that people don't really care. Like our youth and just us as people, the power of communication and the importance of talking and doing it afraid, and the importance of us being able to slow down and to process. And so a little bit of my story to kind of bring you to that part of the conversation right there is I come from a broken family. I'm born and raised in Indiana. It was a pretty typical family, mom, dad, sister, and me. And at a young age, about 10 years old, my mother and my father got divorced. And it really impacted me deeply. I was pretty naive as a young man. I thought I had a picture-perfect family. I don't remember really arguments from my parents or just disagreements. But at that age of about 10, and when mom and dad set me and my sister down and they began to talk about a divorce, the separation, it began to put me in a tailspin because I didn't know that communication and vulnerability and using the people around me are one of the most important tools for me to navigate life. But when I experienced a difficult, traumatic situation, and my father, who was such a hero to me, was removed from my life pretty quickly, I began to develop a habit and a pattern, not intentionally, but it was the fake face, it was the fake smile. It was where I kept everybody at an arm's reach distance. Truthfully, a lot of us, we want to belong, we want to be a part of something, but we go through traumas and difficulties, and trust gets broken. And so even though we want to belong, we get to a place where we want to protect because we don't want anybody to make us feel that way again. Like, this was my life. I developed a terrible habit from my parents unintentionally, but it was the fake face, the fake smile, the mask, not the one that some of us wear as protection and as we social distance, but the one that we are around people and on the surface it seems like we're okay, but when no one's around, we're screaming even though we've been quiet. That's who I became, honestly. I navigated some really challenging times at a young age. I was afraid to face the feeling, and so I masked it and I suppressed it. And I always say pressure can bust pipes. Pressure can refine diamonds, but pressure also can bust pipes. See, the pressure is not the problem, it's how we respond and what we do. Our life, it speaks, it screams, it shouts. Our actions are what matter. I didn't know the importance of facing my fears and the challenges, and so I suppressed. And slowly the pressure began to build, and it came out in some very disruptive and destructive ways. As I navigated my young middle school, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, slowly the cracks in the dam were beginning to bust. You could plug the holes for a while, but eventually it just becomes too much. And for me, when I got from middle school to high school and the pressure of the culture and fitting in, I walked away from good friends. I didn't trust people, so I isolated. And slowly the whispers got loud and they got real. And I remember after my freshman year, even though my grades on the surface looked great, I was a straight A student and voted going to be one of the most successful freshmen in my class. Slowly, I got to the place where it wasn't that I necessarily wanted to die, but I just didn't want to deal. I didn't want to deal with the struggles and the pressures. I didn't want to deal with the adversity, the wounds, the challenges. It was exhausting. And so for me, I remember the time that I believed that taking my life was the answer and the solution. When I get opportunities to travel and to speak on it when it comes to mental health and suicide and just this idea and almost this anomaly, right, of people feeling hopeless enough or to a place that maybe exiting life is a real option. I talk to people about it, and I always say it wasn't because I read books and I've read the stats and the studies. I've lived it, I've walked it. And so for me, my freshman year, I began to struggle with this thought of not wanting to deal with life and exiting. I dealt with self-injury and self-harm because, again, the wounds from my past, the traumas, the struggles, I didn't like the way that made me feel. And so I began self-harming myself because I couldn't control sometimes how I felt from other people, but I could control this pain. I was finding these unhealthy ways that pressure was finding its way out. Also, I got to a place where hurting people hurt people. You know, we talk about the bully, but the truth of the matter is that hurting people hurt people. And I tell students and anybody, to me, bullying is an elementary term. It's verbal, it's mental, it's emotional abuse. It's hurting people who hurt people. We struggle with security and worth and value, so what we've learned to do, for some of us, we don't know how to cope. We don't know how to talk, but we want to feel like we matter. But we've learned that we can come to places and try to take our worth and take our value and step on people and hurt people. Hurting people hurt people. That was me as well. I also got involved with drugs and alcohol because I was walking wounded and I was looking for any option or anything to mask and to band-aid what I had felt. And I always say to students, the danger of substance abuse is when you begin to experiment and you're wounded with a trauma or a hurt and a pain, that wound is instantly going to latch on to that substance that's masking it. And so you begin to develop such an unhealthy coping mechanism because every morning you wake up, you'll have that same emptiness and it becomes exhausting. It becomes a counterfeit connection. I never have to let you in because I don't trust you. But I get to share a habit, so I have some community. It's counterfeit, though it's not real. And it has no meaningful relationship to it. And so this was my life. I battled with all of this. Ultimately, I went from straight A's to straight F's. There's a picture on here that I can show you that maybe it's not working, and that's all right. Down arrow. It's all right. Boom. I'm going to the wrong. Here we go. There. You can't see it that well, and that's okay. But that's a before and an after picture. I got involved with drugs and alcohol, and ultimately I got expelled from school. I went from being a straight A student to a straight F student. My life was in a tailspin. Ultimately, when I got kicked out of school my senior year, I went to the military, not because I wanted to. I really didn't have anywhere else to go. I served for 18 months, and I was a great soldier, graduated with honors, but I couldn't give up the substance abuse, and so I got an other than honorable discharge because I failed drug screens. Really, it was only by probably grace that I didn't get a dishonorable discharge because I could have. And I came back to my home at 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, just living in my hometown, struggling, suicidal thoughts and just hurts and pains, and I wore the mask real well. You know, the one that on the surface it would look picture perfect. And ultimately, at 23, I was still battling my drugs and the alcohol and these challenges, and a bunch of my friends went out to a party, and I went, and then we went to the bar, and the bar was closing, and they said, Nathan, we're going to go to this after party. Do you want to come? I said, sure. I jumped in the car. But first, I didn't say that was the first stop. They asked me about TJ's, where the party was going to be, and I said, yep, sure, I know him. And they said, well, why don't you leave a little bit early and get the party ready? And so I wasn't going to drive, and I get on my phone to call my designated driver. So I called Priscilla, and Priscilla came to get me. She came, and when we left that night, and here's a picture. We left that night, and my buddy had stopped me and said, Nate, you're not driving her. And I said, no, she is. But when we left, by the time we got to her car, somewhere in the process, I got the keys. We didn't make it to the party. We hit a tree at a high rate of speed. I remember her scream the word tree, and then I was in a helicopter, and then I woke up in a hospital bed, and I woke up with officers over top of me asking me questions. Her cell phone was locked, her ID was in her purse, so they had to wait till I woke up and I could say her name's Priscilla Owens. And today, when I spent time with your kids, we walked through so many of these topics. And ultimately what happens in this story with Priscilla in my life, 3 days after the wreck, well, the next morning, 24 hours later, Priscilla lost her life. She passed away. We had a tree at the high rate of speed, and she didn't have on her seatbelt. And she hit the windshield, and there was a lot of trauma. But 3 days after the wreck, the family, Priscilla's mother, Carolyn, her sister, Olivia, their daughter, Paige, Priscilla's niece, they wanted me to contact them. What do you say? I'm sorry, forgive me. And I call, and I'm weeping, and I don't know what to say. I'm sorry. And they say, Nathan, we don't know you. We've never met you. But we've decided in this moment to pick love over hate. And we've decided in this moment to forgive. And we've decided in this moment not to be afraid of feeling uncomfortable. And we're asking you to do two things. Don't let Priscilla pass away for nothing, and try to make the world a better place. But just because the family forgave me, it doesn't mean that the state of Indiana did, because choices have consequences. And so at 23 years old, when I should have been a senior graduating college, I found myself sentenced to 15 years in prison, charged with reckless homicide, with a DUI, resulting in bodily harm and death. And when I went to prison, it would have been real easy to say I give up. I come from a broken family. I come from a world of hurts and pains and suicidal thoughts and self-injury and eating disorders and just drugs and alcohol. But I remember when I was a kid, my father, he had a quote, something that he had said to me that, man, it always stuck with me. And I don't even know that he really realized it was his quote. But he said, as long as there's breath in your lungs, there's hope in your heart. As long as you're breathing, yes, you can. And it was in that moment that I remember that I looked in the mirror and I realized that how I was dealing with adversity and challenges and struggles, it wasn't working. How did I know? Literally, I was in prison. My life now didn't only affect me, but the pressure that exploded, the shrapnel, it began to affect the people around me in drastic, unchangeable ways. Priscilla. But I remember that I looked in the mirror and I made a decision that I was going to keep a promise to this Owens family, and I wrote the words, change the world, and I slapped it and I put it on the bathroom mirror. And I began to get to the place that I realized that every single day that I was going to look in that word, at those words, change the world, and I didn't even know what that meant, but I was going to make choices and decisions that would bring it closer and not push it farther away. And I began to develop in 2009 and 2010 and 2011 these 5 habits in my heart and that it's in my mind that's changed my life drastically. And it's transparency and accountability and hard work and good choices and valuing the people around me. And I began to believe that in the middle of adversity, in the middle of an uncomfortable situation, that if I would face the thing that I was the most afraid of, which was me, and not be afraid of feeling uncomfortable. And I think that's really important for where we are today in a world where things quickly can change and normals become not normal, and then what is normal and our normal routines and habits, right? Like it's important, especially now for us as people, to know that it's okay sometimes to feel uncomfortable and that we can lean into that feeling. Because too often in the world that we live in, we don't like any of the negative feelings, and we want fast, quick, impulsive emotions of positivity. And here I was in prison, and it would have been easy to say, hey, I give up. My life's a waste. But I wrote this word, and I put it on the mirror. And I decided that in the middle of the adversity, I can begin to believe that my circumstances don't define me, but it's what I do, which is what matters. My life speaks. Because pressure can bust pipes. Pressure, when we suppress the very tool that activates you and me. See, this is what I tell people because I believe it. Inside of all of us, in our DNA, in the very essence of who we are, man, we have problem solving and resiliency and perseverance in us. But the activation, the ignition that starts that process is communication. It's talking. Why does every good counselor and social worker and psychologist, what do? They ask questions. Why? Because they know that when you begin to communicate and to talk and to express and to process, naturally inside of us, problem solving is activated. And the problem for me is I didn't trust anybody because of my past, and I decided that nobody would ever make me feel that way again. So I would not let anybody in. And so the very tool that activates my ability to face any challenge and say, yes, I can, which is talking, I wouldn't do because I didn't trust any of you. And that's real, y'all. And so I got to a place that I realized that how I had been dealing with pressure in my past which was exploding pipes, and shrapnel wasn't only affecting me now, but it was affecting the people around me, that it didn't work. And I needed to change how I was dealing with things. And the first thing it was the social and the emotional mask, the fake face, the fake smile. I had to begin to realize that I had to do it afraid and begin to trust those people in my circle. See, a lot of us struggle with trust because we don't want anybody to ever make us feel the way that we felt before by somebody else. It doesn't feel good. We don't like feeling uncomfortable. But the truth is, I would determine my trust factor was wrong, how I judged who I could trust. I decided that I would only trust you if I knew that I knew you would never disappoint me, if you would never let me down. The problem that we all know as we've matured, that people are people. And sometimes even good, healthy, valuable people in our lives have a lack of self-awareness and say something hurtful, or they don't understand, and people at times will just disappoint us. And truthfully, we disappoint each other at times. And I've realized that I was trusting people on the wrong factor. See, trust isn't a factor based on feelings. Trust is a factor based on a decision in spite of how I feel. See, trust is a factor that I do when I know that you are for me, the decisions, the choices. I've watched the history of our life, that I know that mother, that uncle, that aunt, that grandma, that community peer member, that friend in my life, that even though, man, they maybe have hurt me, I know if I was honest, those people believe in me. Their life's choices have led me to see that because I've lived life and what they've done for me, right? See, trust isn't based on feelings. It's based on a decision. When you know people are for you in spite of at one point in time maybe hurting you. And so I got to a place where I started being vulnerable and transparent with those people around me. I was willing to do it afraid, and I brought people, and I started being transparent, which literally to me means see-through. I was willing to allow those people that I was living life with to actually begin to lock arms and me to be honest and open, and that I just had to do it afraid. Because again, it wasn't that it felt the greatest, but trust isn't based on feeling, it's based on a decision, because you know it's the very tool that activates everything for you. Conversations matter. And so I began doing that. And my inner circle, I started realizing that the words that I was sharing, they were getting emboldened because vulnerability bursts more vulnerability. And as I began to realize that they had struggles too, and I began to look around the world, and I've learned that every single person breathing is beautifully broken some way, somehow. We've all got issues. We've all got stuff. And I began to realize that, man, as I shared with him, it wasn't that the people in my circle had to have profound epiphanies and answer every world struggle problem that I had. You know, what did they do? They listened. Why? Because as I started talking, I was activating what? Problem solving. I was activating perseverance. I was activating my mind, realizing that there's an area in my life that if I will face, and that if I will talk, and if I will get uncomfortable and feeling uncomfortable, that, man, that pressure doesn't have to bust a pipe, but it can refine a diamond inside of me. And so transparency began to give me accountability, which meant those people around me, they become anchors. They can't make me change. But there's a lot of times we as people, we want to change. There's an area that we need to change. We should change. But nothing changes, and we run back to being what we always were. Why? Because this is uncomfortable. This is comfortable. It's what we've always known. And sometimes we'll stay in unhealthy situations, in environments, even though it's uncomfortable, even though it's not healthy, but it's comfortable. But when I started facing some of the characters and the challenges of my feelings and processes, those people around me, they couldn't make me change, but when the emotion of the fear of running to run back, they could hold me like an anchor. See, transparency and accountability is an anchor. And I got to this place of realizing that hard work works. Make good choices, good things happen. Throw things against the walls, what I tell people. That thing that you're passionate about, What you feed will grow and what you starve will die. And so as I was still moving towards, I didn't know I was going to become a communicator, guys. I didn't. I just wanted to make a difference. I didn't know that the possibility of me using words and oration to impact and influence people, to maybe think pragmatically about a problem. I didn't know I'd have that gift or my passion. I just wanted to help people. And so I realized that every choice that I make is it helping or hurting the thing that I threw against the wall, my dream, my passion. I don't like calling them dreams, though, because that's like a mental assent. I'm about plans. That thing you're passionate about, I believe in you, and you need to believe in you that, yes, you can. Is there breath in your lungs? Yes, you can. And the more we have goals and purposes and things that we're working towards, what we feed grows. The more we starve our inadequacies and our insecurities. Not that we don't talk about them, we do, but they don't define us. So I didn't do 15 years because I would still be in prison until 2024. But I always say transparency and accountability and hard work and good choices and valuing people will create an opportunity in spite of your circumstance. What you do matters. See, pressure can bust the pipe, but pressure can refine diamonds. And so I started leaving the prison 2 years into my sentence and traveling all across the state of Indiana in street clothes and going to D1 colleges like Purdue and IU, PUI, and Ball State, and doing talks. And the governor of Indiana, about 3.5 years into my sentence, they wrote a letter saying that this young man's effective and prolific and proficient at what he does. And I walked out of that prison 11.5 years early. And I say that always just to say this. I told the students today, I don't know your story, what you have or what you don't have, where you come from or where you don't come from. But I promise you this, the symphony of your life, the story of your life, you're not a product of your environment, no matter the storm around you, but what you do when you find the courage to face the thing that you're the most afraid of, which is feeling uncomfortable, opportunities will arise. I walked out of the prison 11.5 years early, and I reached out to one public school, and one turned to 10, and 10 to 50, to hundreds. We did schools before COVID in Guatemala and Zimbabwe and Brazil and Tokyo, hundreds of schools across this nation. And truthfully, the last 20 months, and this is where I really want to wrap this around, I wanted to give you guys some background. When COVID happened, and a lot of our comfortabilities became uncomfortable, and our normals became not normal, and what is normal. Our world for all of us changed quickly. And I went back to 2 times in my life when my world changed overnight quickly. And yeah, one of those times it was self-inflicted because of the choices and the decisions that I made to get behind the wheel. But the time when my father left and abandoned what I felt, I dealt with those 2 situations totally different. The first way, I isolated, I suppressed, I didn't talk, I minimalized, I hid, and pressure busted a pipe. The second time, I leaned into it. I was transparent. I was vulnerable. I used my people around me. I began to realize that our life is like these ladders. I always use ladders because ladders are very similar to you and me. They come literally in every different color. There's red and orange, and there was a galvanized one today, and there's green ladders and blue. They really do. They come in every different height of 6, 8, 10, 12 foot. They come from different materials. Fiberglass, steel, wood, aluminum. They come in different walks of life. Some are covered in drywall and stay on top of work trucks and are abused and have had a hard life. Others are covered in paint, and some stay in garages and hang on the corner and never get used except to clean the gutter once or twice. But no matter where the ladder comes from or what it's been used for, regardless of how you use a ladder, is that you just have to climb it. They're very similar to you and me. And for so long, I tried to climb the first time the pressures and the storms by myself, and I wouldn't let anybody in. But when I began to realize the power of horizontal and vertical relationships, those peers that I could trust that are in my inner circle, my friends that relate to me that I can use, I needed to allow them to begin to hold the base of my ladder. But I also needed those vertical relationships of counselors and teachers and parents and influencers that have been through some struggles So as I began to climb, there would be times that I'm too high for my peers to help me. But those people that are seasoned, that have been through some things that can speak life to me. See, horizontal and vertical relationships allow you to climb and to achieve. And I normally will call people down and I'll climb this ladder. And so right now, this last 20 months, for me and my family even, we had 103 talks cancel at the beginning of COVID. The next 3 months of March, April, to May of 20, I had 103 different talks that had to, because big events weren't really a popular thing. And so my wife and I, we went to the desert, we went to the wilderness, and we stayed in a tent for 52 nights. And I began to process, man, my world just changed again overnight. How am I going to deal? Am I going to operate where the pressure busted the pipe, or am I going to operate in the way, in the window, where this can really glass half full and not the glass half empty? And so I've leaned into the power of transparency and accountability and hard work and choices and making the next right decision and realizing the most powerful tool that we have is communication. And man, there's never been a more important time for our students and our young people and for us to know the power of communication and the importance of that we matter and that we care. The truth is, well before COVID, our world was already in a super challenging, uncharted territorial time. You see, we've never had a generation, we've never had a parent, we've never had to teach, we've never had to be peer-to-peer, ever with this amount of digital technological advancement. And so we have nothing to draw from the past. There is no study, right? There is no research. And so we've already had a challenge of a place that one of the most important tools that we have, that you and I have, is our ability to be a critical thinker, our ability to process. What makes you and me special, I believe, is our ability that instincts don't determine action, that we can slow down and not respond and be impulsive, but we can make decisions. In the world that we live in right now, man, we're losing our ability to communicate and to be a critical thinker. Like the technological advancements. And then you throw a medical pandemic across the country and across this globe. And now the social, if you ask me, I understand the physical distancing, but using the word social, and I've been very vocal, we got to stay socially connected, and we can because of the digital ability, and thank goodness we're going to get better with this. But the importance for you and I to stay socially and emotionally connected with the people around us is so important. Because, man, it stimulates and it activates communication, and we're not an island, and we won't see our blind spots, and we need each other. And our young people need to continue to know that, yes, they can, and that we can speak life, and we can be encouraging, and we can keep building bridges. See, I ask in every school and every community that I go to, how many of you do you know somebody who's struggling with thoughts of wanting to give up, and hands get raised? And man, we have the ability, for some reason, that these talks, it's almost like we can just cause people to open up. And people ask, Nathan, how is it that you can get other people to take off their social and their emotional mask? And I'm like, because I will take mine off first. I will be vulnerable. I will be transparent. I've gotten to a place that I don't compare. I don't try to put myself in other people's expectations. I don't settle, though. My effort has every day to give it everything that I can. But I've realized the power of being vulnerable and transparent. And our young people, they need our ability to be vulnerable and transparent. You got to keep building bridges. I was sitting down with a leading thought processor, one of the leading doctors in Cornell University, and when it comes to self-injury and self-harm, and I was asking her questions. And she said, Nathan, you got to keep just building bridges. And she said it this way, when students and people have developed negative patterns of how they deal with the pressure, if you keep building a bridge, though, you think of it this way: if you were on a desert stranded island 5 miles off the coast, if you knew a bridge was there, even though your stubbornness and your behavior and your ego and I'm going to do this, When the storm comes, your natural instinct is what? If you knew there's a bridge, people aren't going to just normally typically drown. They're going to run off the island and run across the bridge. And so when you have people in your story and in your life that maybe they're the lack of trust and there's walls and they don't want to let anybody in, we just keep building bridges. And we're vulnerable and we're transparent. I always tell parents and staff, and I always say, I don't ever go across any policy line, but when it comes to parents or when it comes to you, mentoring and being honest about your story and your struggles, and they say, well, how vulnerable am I? I say you go right to the door or the place that you feel uncomfortable and you take one more little baby step. Because that place will activate something in our loved ones. Because vulnerability, it bursts vulnerability. And the importance of us being present with our children, not on autopilot. I got 2 kids. We come back from the desert with COVID. We sold everything that we had. We live in a coach full time. We travel the country just doing this, like crying out like life, live, purpose, hope, activate, actions your life speaks regardless of your storm. Like you can use this